Hi, happy Monday. I am going to try to offer some information to you today that might be helpful as you read the second half of Their Eyes Were Watching God and read over the three poems that I've posted in Canvas to complement the work you're doing in the novel. So let's start first by going back to the recurring themes that often show up in cross-cultural American lit. I want to highlight just a couple of those themes today and connect those to the readings for this week. So one of those that's really important for our readings right now is the theme of poverty and the debilitating effect that poverty, particularly if it's generational poverty, can have on individual mobility. Poverty can limit a person's vocational opportunities, her access to education, can cause a rejection of whatever her expertise or skill set might be by those in power, and can create exclusion, whether it's exclusion of immigrants or exclusion of racial or ethnic groups that are considered the minority by those in power. And we see some of this in Their Eyes Were Watching God, but we definitely see this theme referenced by implication in Angelou's poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This is one of the things that makes the existence of Eatonville in Florida so remarkable. It really was the first fully incorporated, free black town, at least in Florida, possibly in the United States. So it's really remarkable that the men and women who created that town were able to build this economy, hold positions of power within this community, own property, elect and hold public offices. Now we see many of the same structures that create oppression in white society. For example, the women who live in Eatonville, even though they enjoy a lot of comfort and prosperity in their homes, in their apparel, in their freedom to kind of move around in the community, they're not allowed to own property. They're often ridiculed by the men and dismissed as unintelligent or weak. And these are some of the assumptions that cause a lot of conflict between Janie and Joe Starks. But of course, when Janie does try to assert her autonomy and independence after Joe dies, she's criticized for this by the other women who live in the town and the other men. Many of the men who live in the community are eager to step into Joe's place, both because of the wealth he had accumulated and the influence and prestige that he carried as the mayor and as the wealthiest person in town. So this dynamic of poverty and mobility is present in the novel. It just appears differently because of the context in which it plays out. A couple other themes that are really important for you to consider are conflicts within the family. We see some of this conflict between Nanny and Janie very early in the novel when Janie wants to experience her sexual awakening and enjoy the freedom of adolescence a little longer, and Nanny wants her to get married and move into adulthood. Of course, part of this is Nanny wanting her to be secure because she knows that Janie is basically an orphan. Nanny is the only family member she has. And until Janie becomes married, Nanny is the only person who can provide any kind of stability and protection. But Janie resists that. She doesn't want to marry Logan Killix. She doesn't want to become tied down to an old man and have to lean into the hard labors of being a farmer's wife. So we see some of those family conflicts. We also see a lot of conflicts among spouses in the novel. Some of the other couples in Eatonville experience infidelity or conflict in their marriages. We definitely see that between Jody and Janie. And we see some of that in the Everglades as well. particularly between Mrs. Turner and her son. You know, her desire is to elevate her son. And so she tries to insinuate herself into relationships where she believes there's personal benefit either for her or him. A really important theme in the poems and in the novel would be conflicts created by sexism and gender roles. The men in the novel desire control and power, and some level of autonomy. That's part of what motivates Jo's insistence that Janie tie up her hair, that she not speak publicly, that she work in the store as a subservient to him. He isn't trying to elevate other people over her, but he definitely wants her to be submissive to him. And that's inherent in his ideas about what makes a woman a good wife and what it is that characterizes a legitimate, respectable husband. Janie's evolving sexuality creates conflict for her in some of her relationships, but is also freed in her marriage to Tea Cake. And a lot of the energy in their relationship comes from the freedom that they experience with one another sexually. Nanny's ideas about marriage are very utilitarian and practical. Janie's head is full of dreams of romance and passion. So sexual identity is a theme, a topic that runs throughout the novel. And the narrator comments on this as well. So you really should pay attention to the things the narrator is saying about who Janie is, what she desires, what are those things that cause her heartache or discouragement or disappointment, and what are those things that fill her with a sense of wholeness and optimism and hope. Power and powerlessness are important topics in this novel as well. For all of the writers who were producing literature during the Harlem Renaissance, they were recognizing the consistency with which economic opportunity was often limited for people of color. And much of the nonfiction, poetry, and fiction that was generated during this time was a rebellion against that and a protest against that. Janie and Tea Cake live pleasurable lives in the Everglades. They are making money, but they're living very simply, and so they don't desire a lot of money. Whereas Jo Starks desires to compile a large fortune. He wants to be rich, and he wants to be viewed as a wealthy man. The persistence of white power is also evident in the poems. We see this definitely in Langston Hughes' poetry, Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? That last question reveals the power of suppressed desire among thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across many generations. There is a dangerous power in systematic oppression. Caged Bird also references power and powerlessness through the imagery in this poem. She contrasts the free bird to the caged bird, and it is impossible to read this poem and not imagine that she's referencing free men and women of color contrasted with enslaved people of color. And so part of what allows the free bird to sing and follow the trade winds and enjoy the color and the ripeness of life is the freedom that it has. The caged bird is stripped of all of those things. And so the language she uses, particularly in this stanza in the poem, highlights the nightmare of unreasonable and enduring enslavement. Still, the caged bird sings. And of course, this is a reference to the significance of music and spirituals in the lives of men, women, and children who served as slaves or were still fighting discrimination even after the end of slavery and the conclusion of the Civil War. We also see the persistence of white privilege during the scenes in the last few chapters following the hurricane in the Everglades. After Janie and Tea Cake survive the storm, they're making their way back to the quarters where their friends, they assume and hope some of their friends are. And of course they encounter white men with rifles who are forcing any and all black men in the area to do the gruesome and difficult work of burying dead bodies and clearing out the debris from that storm. We also see white privilege present in the courtroom scene when Janie is being tried for Tea Cake's death. It is a jury of white men who determine whether she acted out of self-defense or if her actions were murderous. White women sit in the courtroom and watch this trial play out as if it's entertainment. So the dynamics there illustrate very clearly the persistence of white privilege and the tremendous power that is granted to people simply because of the color of their skin, or the power that is stripped away from a person based on the color of his or her skin. And then another theme for you to think about is the patriotism and the quest for the American dream. Janie is on a quest. This is a novel of heroic quest. I don't believe it's the American dream in terms of vocation or possessions or lifestyle that Janie is seeking. Rather, she is on a quest for self-actualization. She is trying to discover her own identity. What is it about her that gives her value, makes her beautiful and strong and worthy of life? And she also desires a partner in that. For her, the real perfect love is union with another person who shares her dreams, her love of wildness and beauty and physical pleasures, but also sees her as an equal. But this idea that many people of color have been excluded from opportunities for prosperity and the freedoms that many people conceive of as a part of the American dream, that's a theme that shows up frequently in cross-cultural lit, but particularly the literature of African American writers. I think this is very clear in Harlem. To some degree, it is in testimonial, although Rita Dove is imagining the beginning of life, in a way, a return to Eden, where segregation and discrimination and violence don't exist, and all human beings are their best selves. She's reaching past the labels, the derogatory chains and limitations that are placed on men and women of color. She's reaching way back before all of that to identify and celebrate what is essential and vibrant in the human spirit. So these themes help us to think about the literature that we're reading. I hope some of these comments will help you make some sense of the events in the novel and help you to pay attention to important passages in the story. I look forward to seeing all of you in our virtual class session at the end of the week, and hope that you'll have